are very interesting times for the automotive industry. A lot has been happening lately globally and across the world. One of the key developments, obviously, which we cannot fail to mention, is the US tariff regime since earlier this year. Now, with the US imposed tariffs, which vary in rate from one geography to another, obviously, they are expected to represent and have been representing significant headwinds. There are estimates that the cost implications to the industry range in the hundreds of billions this year and potentially to increase further next year. Cost to the US consumer of vehicles is also expected to increase as a result of the tariffs. Now, the US being one of the largest countries in the world, actually second market in the world, second only to China in terms of automotive, this is a huge challenge, and the automotive industry is one of the key industries for some of the other regions as well, such as China now and the EU, Germany, and so on. So this is obviously one of the key challenges and the key topics that are expected with now recurring information about possibly reintroducing tariffs and increasing tariffs between the US and China. This is a key point which we cannot ignore. One of the other trends is the electrification. Now, over the past couple of years, after that, it has been estimated that everyone is going electric. Electric vehicles were on the rise. Now there's a bit of a slowdown there. Plug-in hybrids and other hybrids are now making a comeback, sort of. OEMs, major OEMs are all now reconsidering their investments into EVs and maybe shifting part of their investment budgets towards plug-in hybrids. Last year, it was estimated that around 95 million vehicles were sold worldwide, out of which 71 were still internal combustion engine vehicles, and close to 11 million, 10.6 of EVs, and the rest as plug-in hybrids. Now, there's a variance globally as to the demand for EVs. Obviously, China is around now 50% EVs, the highest maybe large market in the world for that. Whereas in the EU, it's around 20%. The US is around 10%. So again, it's not all moving in the same direction everywhere. So this is another trend that obviously everyone is keeping a very close eye on. And the third thing, which maybe does not get mentioned as much, but it could come in the near future, is supply chain disruptions, not only from tariffs, but for something, for example, like the Chinese dominance in the rare earth metal space. Now, China has around 90% of the processing of rare earth metal, which is a key input, more so in EVs as well, which is also another challenge on the electrification front. So this is something that if it develops further, it could lead to a significant challenge. It could affect supply chains across the industry. Finally, there are now previous trends that were maybe considered more in the science fiction realm that are now actually becoming quite close and a reality, such as autonomous driving, air mobility, and the third one is less sci-fi, but it's mobility as a service, which is something that is growing significantly and is expected to affect the demand and the way that the mobility sector operates. The tariffs are obviously a huge challenge. The cost implications for manufacturers are huge. It also presents a challenge for them to be able to sell, apart from the fact that they have to obviously realign their supply chains. So notoriously complex supply chains. There's pressure on various OEMs now to redirect some of their manufacturing into the US, obviously because the US is one of the biggest markets. So that would increase their costs, and at the same time, the demand, because at the end of the day, they would either have to absorb the tariff or they have to pass it on to the consumer, which makes also the demand for certain, the ability or the purchasing power of the consumer might not be as it was before. So tariffs is a challenge that is likely to actually slow down the global production, expected around 1.7% this year and maybe a little over 2% next year. If we talk about the region, then the three largest markets for automotive would be always UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. So these can be used as a proxy for the region, more or less. All three countries were those tariff brackets of 10%. Later on, even as tariffs on certain geographies were reduced, Japan and South Korea, as tariff deals were made with the US, still nobody reached the 10% except maybe the UK amongst the larger manufacturer geographies. So still, as of now, all of the large markets in the region are still at that level. So they are fairly, relatively isolated, we can say. Now, the indirect effect, which was expected and has actually, we are starting to see that, is that there is intensified competition amongst OEMs, pushing more cars, more metal basically, into regions where growth is possible and trying to capitalize on this positive economic performance and positive demand for cars. So we see a lot of Chinese manufacturers now that are pushing more metal in the region. Even some of the European and other manufacturers are trying to sell more cars, basically through their distributors, increasing the targets for their distributors, increasing the budgets and so on. So this is in a way positive for the consumer. Here in the region does have more of a choice and perhaps better offers, perhaps better promotions and so on. But it places some sort of burden or challenge for the distributors here to meet these targets and these plans. This is on the distributor or on the sales side of the chain. We see now a lot of manufacturing capacity that is being contemplated or announced in the region, primarily in Saudi and in Egypt. We have seen towards the end of, this actually started in the end of last year, where a lot of Chinese OEMs have partnered or announced JV partnerships with local Egyptian entrepreneurs at large groups to start producing cars or plans to start production capacities in Egypt, whether it be of EVs or even of internal combustion engine cars. And Egypt could act as a significant springboard and hub for exports in the region, and it would also help the manufacturers circumvent certain barriers in the future. For example, if a Chinese car is being assembled or manufactured in Egypt, it might then be able to export to other regions without the tariff barrier, if there is a free trade between Egypt and the export destination. So this is also something that we expect to see more of in the region and could be a game changer, because capacities in that space are expected to be quite significant. Electrification is picking up significantly. For the UAE, for example, the electric cars have doubled out of the total cars on the road. They have moved from 2% in 23 to 4% in 24. Surveys about the satisfaction of passengers who are driving EV cars is 90% plus in the UAE, Qatar and Saudi, which is way higher than the global average. That continues to be challenging because, again, some EVs are a bit higher in price compared, and the choice for EVs is still limited compared to internal combustion engines. There is also a lot of preference in these regions for larger SUV models and so on. So these are not as prevalent as EVs, and the price tag when they are is quite sizable compared to internal combustion engines. So this is the sort of the headwinds there, but we see that this has not been slowing the EV adoption as much as one would expect. Another factor which is supporting EV adoption a lot is there is quite a strong and stable regulatory and government policy when it comes to electrification. The UAE government, for example, is announcing consistently initiatives, investing in charging points, investing in a lot of infrastructure in relation to EVs. So this is quite stable and has been growing, moving in the same direction year after year, which is only expected to further improve the EV adoption. The targets globally, actually, for electrification have been quite challenging for everyone. If you look at now, most of the OEMs globally are speaking with the EU regulators. For example, we'll talk about Europe. They're saying, no, actually, having a complete ban on ICE engines by 2030 or 2035 is very unrealistic. We'll not be able to get there. And also the consumers are not ready because the demand is not picking up. So they're asking for more time to be able to do that complete shift. Obviously, the recent US change of policy on the whole electrification, removing of tax credits, for example, removing of credits for EVs and so on, and the whole shift away or pivot away from renewables since the beginning of the year is also quite obvious, and it is likely to maybe slow things down further. The advantage that this region has is that actually this sort of one step forward, two steps back actually is not there. There is a very clear and stable policy direction over time. There has never been any, maybe the targets were not as aspirational compared to, for example, the EU. We're talking here, it's more towards the 2040 and 2050, whereas in the EU it was 2030 and 2035. So while the targets were not as aspirational or as aggressive, the progress towards them is quite steady and supported by policy and regulation. It is impossible now to speak or to look at the automotive sector without mentioning China. China is the largest manufacturer in the world now. They are very prominent in EVs, 50%, as I mentioned, EVs in China itself. We see actually that they have developed their industry a lot. We can see that the cars are much better in quality, in design, even in the branding. Now they have started to use more consumer sort of friendly brands and names, not only Chinese names that were maybe successful in the Chinese market, but also for export markets. Now they are cognizant of the branding. All of this is leading to significant strides in the Chinese car adoption. I'm talking about the region specifically. A couple of years ago, Chinese cars surpassed for the first time US cars in the UAE. 10 to 15%, in some estimates even 20% market share combined for the Chinese manufacturer in the UAE. If you look at 10 years in Saudi, from 2017 till now, it was 1% adoption for Chinese cars. Now we're talking about 12. In Egypt, Chinese cars are now the number one, even surpassing Japanese and other countries of import, with around 37% market share. Obviously, there are now discussions in China itself, and you can see in the public domain that the government directions is that now there are too many manufacturers in China and that consolidation needs to happen, and that the Chinese manufacturers are entering into a lot of price wars, which are hurting some of the major manufacturers, and that they should try as much as possible to steer clear from that. There is bound to be a consolidation from 100 plus manufacturers now in China that the various experts and analysts expect in a few years maybe 10 to 15 of them to survive the consolidation, which is bound to happen. And even 10 to 15 manufacturers is quite a high number, I mean, for one country. So yeah, it would be interesting to see how that evolves. But yeah, I don't expect that to slow down anytime soon. One of our unique advantages, which I believe makes us best positioned to help our automotive clients, is our sector specialized coverage model. So we cover the full value chain from the OEM to the distributor and so on. So we are able to offer uniquely tailor-made solutions and holistic supply chain solutions, which is now crucial for the industry in light of all of the supply chain disruptions. We cover the full value chain. The OEMs are our clients, and the distributors through which they sell in the region are also our clients. So in that way, we are able to create end-to-end solutions that cover the requirements of both. An OEM is interested to, for example, increase their presence in the region to grow their sales in terms of cars, which requires the distributor actually to benefit from certain working capital facilities or what have you. So we are able to sit on the table sometimes with both of them and devise an end-to-end solution for that. On the sustainable finance front, that while maybe this has taken a backseat a bit in certain geographies, the US for example, but we see that as something that will come back. This year we have closed about over 3 billion of dirhams of sustainable finance transactions, and we are uniquely positioned to use that first mover advantage to help our clients transition into sustainable finance, which is expected to be crucial going forward.